will be this is quite a turnout on this class.
Yeah, this is great. Also, I started the recording, so I can start saving them for people who weren't able
so
to
now
make
we
it.
have to watch what we say?
Yeah, that's the warning,
Whoops,
right?
starting with that one.
Welcome to all the new people. Incredibly professional we are, if you haven't noticed. we all work together so much that it's more like we're on some group chat, some fun Facebook meeting, hanging out with our friends versus at work, which is always the vibe we want to give off. So welcome to our crazy family at the Red Cross. I'll just let you guys take over. I'm going to mute my line. You start whenever, but it's recording.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I'm Doc Morgan, and my colleague is, and someone rolled over the top of the presentation and just cut it.
How do we go back?
We will bring it back up. Oh, and there's still people logging on anyway, so that works out.
And while we're doing that, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Charlie Kaplan. I'm the co-presenter here with Doc. And for all the experienced Red Crossers, obviously this is a big review. For the newer folks, welcome. This is some basic stuff that we're going to go through, and it's all going to make sense in probably the next 20 to 30 minutes.
Okay, I would ask you, if you're not sure of what button you're rolling over, stay away from it. Because someone rolled over the presentation button and took it away, and I wasn't changing positions on people here as they signed in. But in any case, let's get started. So we're gonna, this class is in two parts. What is a gap? And then how do I get one? For the new people that we have.
Yeah, Doc, excuse me, I'm going to just remind everybody, if you have a question, you can just post it in the chat box, and we'll address it. If not right at that moment, we'll keep track of it, and at the end, we can go back and address all of your questions.
And I'm about to tell you where to do that at.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So if you look over on the little bar there, we ask for you to keep your video off with a number of people so we can save bandwidth. The mic, everyone seems to be pretty good about having themselves muted. The little box with the arrow in it, stay away from that, please, because that gets to sharing the presentation. But if you see the little box with the flag, if you click on that, that should take you to the chat box. And while I'm doing the first part, any questions that you have, just put it in the chat box. Charlie's going to be monitoring that for me. And then at the appropriate time, we'll address your question. And then Charlie and I will reverse positions there when he comes into his part. The little people symbols, that's let us know who all's on. And then the final little thing, if you've just simply had enough and you want to run out of here screaming, just click on that button, because that will end your link. Okay. So with that in mind, so we're going to cover these topics, and they're as straightforward as it is. So we are going to cover, what is a gap and why do you need one? That'll be embedded. And then Charlie will enlighten you thoroughly about how do you go about getting one. And during the conversation, can you have more than one gap? You absolutely can. And we'll add in a lot more types of information and allow you to ask any questions that you have. Especially with the new people, please chime in. And we definitely appreciate that so we can address those. So gap. When I first heard that term, I wanted to know, what does a clothing store have to do with the Red Cross? So that's not it. But you can think of it, this is the acronym that we use to describe our positions, our duties. What kinds of specialties do we have? So we have functional areas, all in disaster operations to complete our Red Cross mission. So we're working directly with our clients, supporting clients, external constituents, and we have operational management or our command staff. So in order to put some order to this, we divide this down into what we call groups and activities. And the G in GAP stands for group, and we're going to show you what those are. Then each group has certain types of activities, and that's just a further refinement of what types of things are being done within that group. And then the P is for position. While the acronyms and the letters for the group and the activity, they will change around, but the position codes, service associate, will be used throughout. And just think of that as your basic entry. Everyone starts as a service associate. If you decide that you want to become a supervisor, that's listed as SV. And then we have managers, and then we have chiefs. It'll take you a while to get up to the chief level. And then within the operations management group, as you'll see here shortly, there are additional abbreviation acronyms because the Red Cross didn't think he had quite enough, okay? So let's look at this a little bit further. So those three items together, group, activity, and position, that forms when someone asks you what your gap is, okay? Now, we can get a little bit further on this. So every position within that gap has a written description. And if you go to the exchange and type in volunteer position description, there's an index in there, and you can look up exactly what the description is. And it's going to have the purpose and your key responsibilities, reporting structures, development, and qualifications. And especially for new people, this is fairly handy because it kind of gives you a good sensing about what that particular position within that activity and that gap is supposed to do. Some of ours will have physical and emotional requirements, and that can be further amplified by going into the physical capacity grid. As you can imagine, if you're working logistics, you may have different requirements for physical activity than if you're working, let's say, external relations, where maybe you're not being expected to lift 30, 40 pounds, okay? So let's take that down a little further. In order to get that gap, you have to take training. There are requirements, and so there's a document that you can go to, and it's called the Disaster Responder Training Requirements. This changes so often. It is posted in Volunteer Connect, and when you look up at the top and you see that row of different bins of information, and you can find my chapter, and you go down and you're going to find the Disaster Responding Training Requirements. And you can pull that down. It is in a PDF, but National maintains that because it changes quite often. So when you get that document, you can pull that down, take a look, and it's going to let you know by gap, activity, and position exactly what your requirements are. And it'll always be broken out into required and then recommended. And just be advised, because this question comes up quite often. You need to take the required ones to get the gap. Anything that's recommended, no. But you generally will find when you go up, yeah, that what's on that recommended list will probably become a requirement if you go a little bit higher. And when Charlie does his part, he's going to show you exactly where that is. And so I see that in the box there. So this is coming. Now, This gets a little confusing for people. Let's say you go on a deployment. Sometimes you'll have, and I love this phrase, just-in-time training. So you get on a deployment, we don't have the right kinds of skill sets there, so we have to train people. And just-in-time training is exactly what it sounds like. Come over here, sit down next to me. I'm going to give you some training on how you do this task. You may go through the entire deployment, and then when you come back, you say, hey, I did that job. You're not going to get credit for that in Edge as something that meets the training requirement. So don't mix them up. You got to take the actual formal training, or if there's any operational type training, and they get offered all the time. It's really good to take to get it done at that moment, but it's not going to satisfy a course requirement, okay? Now, this is not an eye chart. It could be, but it's not. We'll go over this a little bit. Up at the top, you'll see an area that's all in gray. And for operations management, a lot of those positions you see up there are the kinds of things that you'll see when you go on a disaster relief operation. And you'll see that a lot of these things are appointed. And if it's appointed, that means no Edge type training. But you're not going to get appointed unless you have some kind of background to do that. But for our purposes here today, if you look down at that top row where it starts with mass care and it ends in finance, what you're seeing right there in that first column, mass care, and we're going to go over these a little bit more. I'm on slide 7, and it's a chart. So you'll see mass care, and that's the group. And underneath there, you will see all of the activities, and we'll go over that a little bit more. The next one, and you see them listed, individual disaster care, recovery, and then they tuck down at the bottom, response, that's a group, and then logistics, and I'm going to show you all of those individually. But within this chart, it also lets you know what type positions you can that are associated with each one of those activities. So in that first column, you see mass care / sheltering, sheltering being activity, and you see MNSVSA. Remember, Red Cross can't have enough abbreviations. So that lets you know right there on that chart for sheltering, you can have a shelter manager, a shelter supervisor, or shelter associate. Those are the various positions. Let's break this down a little bit so more. Groups, these are your groups. And we will post, these slides are going to be posted. So when they do, you can go through and look these up if you choose to. But this is the listing. So you have mass care, and please pay attention to the abbreviations, because these, I'm not going to say they're required for you to know, but they're good to know because it keeps you having to carry around a document. And they generally kind of make sense, generally. So MC, mass care, individual, you see response, recovery, log, IP, you see those listed. So those are our primary groups. Our activities, and I just put these together for your use primarily later. So it's kind of like what's on that chart, but a little, but not so much as eye chart. So for mass care, you see MC, mass care, feeding, and it's abbreviated MC, mass care / FF for feeding, more abbreviations. And then if you had another /, that's where your position would be, kind of like you see for generalist chief. And so if you're a service associate with feeding, it'd be MC FF / SA for service associate. And generally when people ask you what your gap, what are your gaps, that's what you most time write down instead of having to say all of those words like mass care, distribution of emergency supplies, service associate. They just as soon as you go MC desk or that. Okay. So you see for mass care, you see for individual care, and this is where we have our health services, spiritual, mental health, and disability integration, and our recovery, our response and recovery. So this is our disaster action teams and our recovery people are under there. Logistics, if you want a mouthful, go to logistics. Because logistics has the greatest number of activities, but because it's necessary because of the way that they break them out. So someone's responsible for facilities and in-kind donations and everything you ever wanted to know about life, safety, and asset protection. Dan is on this call, and you can ask him for LSAP. That's our safety safety and security people. Procurement, transportation. You see all of those. You look down and you see DST. That's our technology. And underneath there, there's additional type specialties, and they just list them as DST, but they can be a generalist, computer operations, communications, customer service. And also when you see on this list, you see Judy North. She's forgotten more about that subject than the rest of us. Staff services. So anything that's wrong with that, you look down in the participants and you see Amanda, you can blame her for this. But staff services, this is exactly how it sounds. So this is where all the people that actually gets us deployed and takes care of us and keeps us going. Oh, very true. Haha, yeah. And without them, nothing's going to roll. Information and planning. This is, if you're on a disaster, this is the entity that's going to be writing the two basic reports that you will see every operational cycle. And that's the situation, your situation report, and the IAP, the Incident Action Plan. Those are produced, and they're produced by the IAP. And we have several people on here that's been involved in that a great deal. And it takes a little bit of skill sets, to be able to write those out. But that first one, disaster assessment, once you've had the disaster and the tornado or fire and it's gone through the neighborhood, we need to find out to assess the damage. That's the people that will go in and assess that damage. So lots and lots of information up under there, no pun intended with these guys. Our external relations, we have external relations for community engagement, engaging with government, our fundraisers, and our public affairs. Those are the primary things under external relations, and very important, and they're already engaged even before you get to the disaster. Operations management, this is primarily what you're going to see once you get on a DR. The assistant directors for logistics, information and planning, external workforce, and that's a new one. The workforce, think of that, that's where all the staff services and things of that nature to keep our people in the field. That's where that is. Okay. Now, I've covered everything about what a gap is. You'll have the slides, and my colleague Charlie is now going to pick up the gauntlet, and I'm going to stop presenting, and he's taking control. I like that, good positive terms there. And he's going to go through, after I've told you all this stuff, how do you get one? Charlie, it is all yours.
Thank you, sir.
You're most welcome.
If all that business on what is a gap and the GAP and all that, we can come back later and we can review all that. What I'm going to start explaining now is, okay, what Doc just explained to you was this overview of all the many different groups and activities within those groups. It's going to take a while, especially for the new folks, to kind of understand what all of that is, and it just takes time. And we were all there. We're volunteers as well. It takes a while, and you can go into one, and Doc had mentioned this earlier, you are not in any way limited to the number of gaps that you can earn, okay? You want to only have one, that's fine. I would recommend more than that, but you can, there's no limit. You can have 10, 20, there's absolutely no limit. The more you're trained, the more you can do. The more valuable you are to the organization, as well as I think the more enjoyment, and speaking to the volunteers, that you are going to get out of your being a volunteer. Because sometimes you might want to do X, and another time you go, oh, good, I can do Y. Let me try that. As long as you're trained, that's terrific. So how do you get a gap? You would go to, and we're going to show you all this, you're going to go to Volunteer Connection. Then you're going to go to, and we're going to show you this in a slide or two, the disaster responder training requirements are listed there. And it'll give you the up-to-date list of what is required for each individual gap. And as Doc mentioned a moment ago, they do change. Requirements sometimes change. And sometimes those, when a requirement changes, you get grandfathered in. Sometimes they say, no, we want you to take the updated version. So don't worry about that for now, but that is where all the requirements are listed. And I'm going to show you how to do that in a moment. All right. So this is Volunteer Connection. Here's a screenshot. And you see up there at the top, you see those little tabs. You see where my cursor is there. You'd go to My Chapter, Responder Training Requirements. And when you click on it, here they are. It's about a 90 some odd page document. You can print it out if you wish. I would recommend against it because, you know, you want to print a ream of paper and then the requirements could change in 2 weeks. But what's listed here will always be what is current. And this is only showing the first page, just shows the mass care. But if when you go to this on your own Volunteer Connection site, you'll be able to scroll through all 90, 100 pages and go to whichever one you're interested in learning more about. Go to that page, just scroll to it, and it's all there for you. And I'm going to show you some more here in a moment. So when you would go into it, and again, we're just showing you the mass care feeding because that's the very first one listed. This is what the page looks like. So it lists next to those little black little bullets, those are the individual training classes that you would need to take if you were interested in being a service associate in feeding. And I'll just put the statement, we need people in feeding. It's a lot of fun. We could use more people doing this. Now, on each line there, let's just look at the first one, for example, where it says Disaster Cycle Services. That's a basic class. It's going to apply, by the way, to many, many different gaps. But in parentheses on the right there, you see some initials. You see WBT, ILT, and VILT. Let me explain what those mean. WBT is a web-based training. That means that it's listed in Edge, and I'll explain Edge in a moment if you don't already know. That means it's an online class. You take it at your own pace, take it whenever you want. Okay? And it tells you how long that class is. And that particular class is 1 hour long. ILT is an instructor-led training. That means we're doing that class live. It's going to be at the chapter office or something along those lines. And there'll be an instructor who will lead a class. Okay. And right now, obviously, we have suspended all ILTs because of the COVID situation. Okay. But eventually we'll be going back to those. And VILT is essentially what we're doing right now. That's going to be something through Teams. It's a video instructor-led training. All right. And so when you see, oh, and there's one other, it says VID. If you look down, say where it says mission cards, it's the fourth little bullet down as an example. It's a video. And this tells you it's 14 minutes long. So so those are the four options: WBT, ILT, VILT, or VID. All right. It is important to understand that so you can decide, it's your choice, how you want to take that class. There's usually more than one way of doing it generally, and it's your choice how you want to do it. All right. In our system, once you complete the class, it usually takes overnight for the system to catch up, and then it will appear in your transcript as completed. So when you're being assigned your gap, we check that and we go through it and make sure, okay, this gap has 6 required trainings or 10 required trainings, and we can just make sure you've got them all, and then we can assign the gap. And I'll show you how that works momentarily. So that's how what all those initials mean. Now it says recommended. You'll often see that, and that's just what it says. We recommend you take those trainings, but they're not required. It will enrich you and your training and what you can provide within that gap, but it's not required. Okay.
Hey, Charlie.
Yes, sir.
We had a couple questions come up. We had one that just wanted to wrap up when they look up at the top and they saw the abbreviations MC/FF/SA.
Yes.
That is what the gap would look like for mass care feeding service associate. So that's how you would write that out.
Thank you.
The other thing was VID. Charlie explained that as a video. I would like to highlight something because this has really been happening quite often here lately. If you watch a video, it's going to give you the opportunity to mark the video as completed. If you do not mark it as completed, it will not show up in your record. Just because you watch the video, it doesn't mean you're going to get credit for it. You got to go in and mark it as complete. It really frustrates a lot of people when they go, hey, I watched it. Yeah, I know, but you didn't mark it. The other question on the VILT, we have a training schedule that comes out once a month. It's posted on Volunteer Connect. And Charlie, if he goes back one, he can show you which column that would be under. And it's called the Regional Training and Events Calendar. Okay. So it's under my shifts, and you go down and you would find that. And it will say, it'll let you know in there for VILT. And all of our instruction right now that we have on that schedule will be virtual led instruction. If later on you wish to become an instructor, you got to take the basic instructor course, and then you can take a specialty thing to become a virtual led instructor. And we have quite a few of them on this line right now. And I think that catches us up with the questions there.
Well, there was one that just came across from Stephanie. She said about requesting the VLT to only be on that monthly calendar. No. What we are listing there under my shifts, and then you go to the regional training calendar, or what we are offering in our region that we have put together. Through Edge, you can look nationally for VILTs, and there may be a class that you're interested in taking that maybe we're not offering here locally meaning our region, the 2 states, but they may be offering in Pennsylvania or originating out of Pennsylvania or Wisconsin or wherever. You are free to take those classes as well. You sign up through Edge, and then when they teach the class, it'll look just like what we're doing right now, but you could have people from all over the country logged in taking the class. So we're offering a selection, but nationally others are, and anybody can sign up for those VILTs. Okay. All right, let me move forward now. Back. All right, so I think we've covered this. And again, this is just an example. This is what Doc was referring to. If you see where my cursor is at the top. Mass care, feeding, service associate. If we were able to scroll, this again is just a screenshot, you would see the next one listed would be the SV requirements, and then the MN requirements, and so forth. Okay, this is just to give you a kind of a sample. Okay, when you go to the real thing, as I said, this goes for close to 100 pages. Okay, I'm going to move on. Okay, I covered some of this already. There are the things I described about the VILTs, the ILTs, the WBTs, and the videos. I want to emphasize again about clicking that little, it's a little check mark. I think it has a little green circle around it that you have to click on for those videos to indicate you have completed it, and then it will show up in your transcript. It's usually on the last slide. Just make sure you do that, or it's headaches. We believe you when you say you take it, but it doesn't show up, and then we have all kinds of hoops we have to jump through. Some classes, some gaps require training through FEMA. And you'll see things like, you need FEMA 200 or FEMA 700. That's a whole different way to additional classes. FEMA is one of our big partners, obviously. And we're not actually going to cover that here, but you have to go to the FEMA site and create an account, and then you can take all of their classes. They're also free, but we're not covering that, how to do that in this particular session. Okay, but that's something certainly if that comes up, contact Doc, you can contact myself, and we'd be happy to explain to you how you do that, because some of the gaps do require that. Okay, oh, thanks, Judy. All right, Judy's helping me out there. Okay, at the very end, we will have our email addresses and phone numbers and all those things. So let me move on. So getting the gap, you complete your training. Then in a volunteer connection, you make sure you have it all, everything that's required. Just make yourself a little checklist. So got that one, got that one, got that one. You can also look at your own transcript, make sure they appear there. Then you go back to the volunteer connection, my chapter, disaster cycle services, etc. And in there you will see a tab that says request a gap. You click on that, open the request, and it's very simple how to request it. Okay, I think the next, yeah, right here. So you go to my chapter, request training, request your gap, and then this is the form that will come up. You put your name, you click a few boxes, which one are you applying for, you certify that you've completed all your training, etc., and you submit it. And then the little elves in the background, that hide under the rocks near Amanda's house will take care of all that, okay? And I know Amanda's not hearing this, but if you really want to, you can also just let me know or let Doc know, and we'll take care of it if you can't figure out how to do the form, okay? But this is the formal way of doing it. It's really quite simple. So that's how you do it. And finally, here we are. So, all right, the nursing question, I would have to defer that. I have to look up the requirements because, all right, during COVID, this period we're under, this unique period, certain gaps have been modified. Because we're in very big need of sheltering folks, health service folks. And so short term, the requirements for health services and for sheltering work have been greatly modified. So people can go through that training. So I used to have that right at the tips of my fingers. I have to look it up. It has been changed. When this period ends, hopefully we all wish sooner as opposed to later, whenever all that gets done, we will go back to the original training requirements, which are a little more extensive, and sort of like what Doc was explaining with the just-in-time training. Those who temporarily got, say, a sheltering gap or a health services gap will then have to go back in order to keep that gap and add in the additional classes that normally would have been there but were removed during this period. So I hope that makes sense. Okay. Amanda's answering part of that. Okay. As you can see, they're changing often. So there's Doc's contact information, my contact information. So we've gone through now what is a gap and how you get one. You may have additional questions. Can we request gaps anytime? Yes. Anytime you feel you have completed those requirements, absolutely request one. Okay, absolutely. As I said, there is no limit. Now, the other part I want to add is as you start getting more than one gap, you start getting 3, 4, 5 gaps, whatever, your top 3 choices for possible deployment, if you wish to ever deploy, you have to indicate which is your primary, secondary, and tertiary, and that will be indicated in your profile, so that when the folks who would contact you to do deployment, let's say you have sheltering as your first choice and staff services as a second choice and something in logistics as your third choice. That's great. That's the order when they see openings that, they need sheltering people or they need staff services. What's going to pop up? Your 4th, 5th, 6th item may not show up initially unless the people who do deployment dig down a little deeper. But you can prioritize your top 3. And again, there is no limit on how many gaps. I'm answering Ashley's question here. If there are 8 you're interested in, go for it, okay? You will start to see that for many of the gaps, many of the classes will apply to more than one gap. They'll apply to 2 gaps, 3 gaps. That's fine. So when you take that class, it's a 2-fer or 3-fer or whatever. And it will be in your transcript. So when you apply for that second gap, third gap, it will appear and we know, you already got that one. Terrific. And you have credit for it and you'll be awarded that gap. Sometimes if a gap is awarded, we may see that, look, you're only 1 class away. If you just took this 1 additional class, you'll get this other gap, which you may not have realized. And sometimes I know I do that. I will then send somebody an email if I'm awarding the gap and say, hey, did you know if you just take this 1 or 2 additional classes, you will earn this other gap? You might be interested in doing that. You may not be interested in doing that. Maybe that's not an area you're at all interested in. That's fine. But my feeling is, why not? If it's only 1 or 2 additional classes, just do it. But that's a personal choice. Okay. There, you can see what Doc is saying there. You'll get we send an email. If we do it, we'll send you an email, say congratulations, something to that effect. You've now earned your gap in X, Y, or Z. And it will also show up in your personal profile that you can check at any time in Volunteer Connection to see what your gaps are that are listed there. And anybody else who has access can look up your profile to see what gaps you have earned. Sometimes at your chapter level or at the district level, even if it's not a DR, they may be needing somebody who has a background in a particular gap. So they'll go through the membership and say, oh, I didn't realize so-and-so has that training. I'll just call them on the phone and see if they can help us out with this. So it's automatically posted there when the gap is awarded to you. Other questions?
Yeah, Charlie, I got a little comment over in here. Charlie mentioned to you that, you can get as many gaps as you want, which is true. One of the techniques that I employed early on was I took a look at the entire disaster cycle timeline. What I wanted to be able to do was have the ability to plug in anywhere in that timeline. So looking at the timeline, because you don't need, you need different specialties at different times. So what I did, I just simply took a look at that timeline and then matched up which gaps I thought would fit best. And I went and got those gaps. So depending upon where we are in the disaster cycle and I want to deploy or do something else, I have the entire spectrum covered because I spaced them out that way. Other people, hey, I like all of these subjects, well, they go get them. But, just different viewpoints. Okay.
Excellent point. And there is no right or wrong way. And for the new folks, you will learn, especially after you start deploying, if that's one of your goals, what Doc is referring to about this cycle of when different areas, different activities are needed. A quick example, shelter people are always like the first people deployed. We need shelters if a hurricane's coming. Okay, and some other gaps too, but just use that as an example. But you don't necessarily need the caseworkers there before the storm comes ashore. You need those folks, absolutely very important, but they may not come out till maybe a week or 10 days after the storm has made landfall. They're not necessarily in that first wave of people heading out, where the mass care people are. As just two quick examples. There's many other examples. It just depends. Now, sheltering people and mass care people, they're generally there for the duration because you go for generally a deployment, generally speaking, is going to be for 14 days. And a shelter may be open much longer than that. So then those folks go home and another group comes in to take their place. It may go longer and a third wave comes in to take their place. So different, and you'll learn this over time, different, and that's what Doc was referring to, different gaps have different needs and different application in the timeline of a response to our clients. All important, but not necessarily all of them are needed on day one, and some are not needed by day 10 or 20 because the shift has moved from that initial response to more of a recovery. And again, for the new folks, as you take more training, what I just described as response and recovery will make a lot more sense. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of that right now. So I hope that answers that question. DAT stands for Disaster Action Team Service Associate. Exactly right, Stephanie. And the DAT is home stuff. 95% of DAT are going to be home fires in your own community, wherever town you live in. So generally the way that works is a call will come in from the local fire department, our disaster duty officers, DDO. Well, they'll call into our 800 number and then it goes to the DDO who gets some additional information. And then on the list that each chapter has as to who is, you put yourself on call for different time periods, which volunteer is on for that period gets called, and those folks, then the local folks will go out, meet with the clients and give them immediate assistance. And when I say immediate, I mean sometimes the fire department's still there, the house is still smoldering, and folks are standing on the street corner, bewildered, and our folks are there giving assistance. That's DAT. You know, the first thing we want to make sure they have a safe place for the night. We can give financial assistance, and they can get a hotel and replace some of their clothing immediately. And then other people will take over, the caseworkers and such, for additional assistance. But that is DAT. I've read things where they've said they want to start making some of DAT for deployment purposes, but I have not seen it occur yet. So it's going to be more of a home, everyday kind of response group. It's going to be your own community as opposed to the deployments, the big wildfires or floods or hurricanes or those kinds of things. Well, there's a whole bunch of training, and we're getting a bunch of questions here about DAT. If you're interested in DAT, that's something, again, that's a local, and there's set training for that too. And if you look there in the DAT is listed in that document, that 90-page document, and the trainings are there. And it'd be the same process. You would go through the trainings and then apply for a gap. That is in the process of changing the DAT because we're switching over on the system of how we provide financial assistance and open cases. We have a new platform that's coming out that's called RC Care, and you will be hearing a lot more about that in the next month or two. So, but that is a very, very, very needed gap. That is not for deployment. That's for folks here at home, wherever home happens to be. And every community needs more DAT people. And again, that's for staying home. A lot of the other gaps are for deployment purposes. So here's DAT. We do this and that.
Hey,
thanks,
one additional comment based off of what you said earlier, Charlie, about the having multiple gaps. If you go on a deployment, let's say I've had this happen multiple times. I went on a deployment and I was assigned as a sheltering type. Well, based on where we were in the cycle, I got there and the need for sheltering diminished, because the DR was beginning to wind down, but I hadn't spent my 2 weeks yet. When you report back to the headquarters, then they look over and go, well, what else are you trained in? What do you have the gaps in? What else can you do? And having those additional gaps, I can then turn around and go, well, I could do damage assessment, or I can do casework because I'm already trained in it, and because they don't like sending you back if you haven't done your 2 weeks yet, unless there's just absolutely no choice. So it does come in handy from time to time. Charlie, I think these are all the questions I've seen so far. Me personally, I would like to thank everyone for coming, and a lot of really, really great questions and commentary. As Amanda put out, these sessions are coming up every Friday, and each time it's a different topic. I believe I saw from Bubba, the DAT discussion will be next week. And so just keep an eye on the regional training calendar and events. You'll see what all training is coming up. And we would encourage you, even if you've been around the Red Cross like forever, there's still all kinds of things that you can learn and then contribute to. Charlie?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, Doc and I have our information up here on the slide. If you have questions about gaps or pretty much about anything else, I'll speak for Doc too, just contact us. If we don't know the answer, we'll make it up. It's okay. We're there, we're volunteers. And we could probably, if we don't know seriously, if we don't know the answer, we could point you in the right direction if you just need a live person. That's not to say that Amanda couldn't or Lindsay couldn't or any of the other DPMs, but we're around also and we're available. Please contact us. We like helping folks.